A single gunshot, echoing through the narrow streets of Sarajevo. A teenager steps forward, trembling, determined, and in seconds, an empire begins to collapse. But this was no simple assassination. It was a chain reaction, already waiting to explode. Secret societies, fragile alliances, leaders blinded by pride. History would later call him the man who started a world war. But the truth is far more dangerous, because the war did not begin with that bullet. It began long before he ever pulled the trigger, before the gun was ever raised, before Sarajevo became a name etched into history. Europe was already unraveling, quietly, deliberately, beneath the surface of diplomacy and ceremony. At the center of this fragile world stood the Austro-Hungarian Empire, vast, aging, and deeply divided. It ruled over many peoples who no longer wished to be ruled. Languages, identities, and loyalties pulled in different directions, while Vienna struggled to maintain control through tradition and authority. To the south, Serbia was rising, not in size, but in ambition. It carried an idea far more powerful than territory: the unification of Slavic peoples. This vision threatened the very structure of empires built on diversity without unity. Between them lay Bosnia and Herzegovina, a land caught in between identities, annexed by Austria-Hungary in 1908, yet emotionally tied to Slavic nationalism. It became a silent battlefield of influence. On its streets, tension did not announce itself loudly. It lingered in conversations, in glances, in quiet resentment. And in those shadows, something more dangerous began to take shape. Secret networks, unseen but active. Young men drawn not by power, but by purpose. Among them was Gavrilo Princip, thin, quiet, and unremarkable to the outside world. But within him, ideas had taken root. He had grown up in hardship, surrounded by stories of oppression and resistance. To him, violence was not chaos, it was a tool for change. Yet, even he was only one piece of a much larger design. Behind the scenes, organizations like the Black Hand operated with precision and patience. They did not seek attention, they sought impact. Their goal was clear: weaken imperial control, ignite nationalist movements, and reshape the region through calculated action. At the same time, another figure moved unknowingly toward this collision point: Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He was not widely loved nor widely understood, but his vision of reform within the empire posed a quiet threat to both radicals and traditionalists. Change in this world was as dangerous as revolution. Above all of this, Europe itself stood armed and ready. Alliances had been formed like tightly wound chains: Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, France, Britain, each bound to the other by promises that left little room for hesitation. Armies had grown, weapons had advanced, plans for war had already been written, waiting only for a reason. And that was a truth often forgotten. The system was already prepared to collapse. The question was never if something would trigger it, but when. And somewhere in Bosnia, on an ordinary street, that moment was quietly approaching. If the story is already beginning to reveal something deeper. A simple like and share helps keep the forgotten truths alive for others to discover. It did not begin with a gunshot. It began with a mistake. A driver, a wrong turn, a moment of confusion that should have meant nothing, but instead changed the course of history. June 28, 1914. Sarajevo. The morning had already failed once. Earlier that day, one of the conspirators had thrown a bomb at the Archduke's motorcade. It missed. The explosion injured others, but Franz Ferdinand survived. The plan, carefully arranged in fragments across the city, had collapsed into chaos. Some conspirators lost their nerve. Others drifted away. Gavrilo Princip was among those who believed the opportunity had passed. He stood near a small shop, quiet, disappointed. Another failed attempt in a long struggle that seemed larger than any one man. Then, without warning, the Archduke's car appeared again. Not by design, but by error. The driver had taken a wrong route. The vehicle slowed, hesitated, and stopped directly in front of Princip. For a brief second, history paused. No grand plan, no coordinated signal, just a young man and an unexpected chance. Princip stepped forward. 2 shots, One struck the Archduke, the other his wife Sophie. Within minutes, both were dying. The act itself was simple, almost small in its execution, but its meaning was immediately transformed. In Vienna, the assassination was not seen as the work of a lone individual. It was interpreted as something far more dangerous, a message, a challenge, a threat connected to Serbia and the rising force of Slavic nationalism. The response was not emotional, it was calculated. Austria-Hungary saw an opportunity to act, to reassert control, to suppress a growing problem before it spread further. But it would not act alone. Germany stepped forward with unwavering support, the so-called blank check, a promise without limits, a guarantee without restraint. With that assurance, the situation shifted from tragedy to strategy. Diplomacy began to tighten into ultimatums. Austria-Hungary delivered demands to Serbia, terms so severe they were never meant to be fully accepted. Serbia complied with most, but not all, and in that narrow gap, war found its justification. Behind closed doors, decisions were being made not just about punishment, but about power, credibility, and dominance. Russia watched closely, unwilling to abandon Serbia. France stood aligned with Russia. Britain observed, cautious but bound by interest. The alliances, once meant to preserve balance, now acted like pressure points. Each move triggered another. Each decision removed another path back. What had begun as an unplanned moment, a wrong turn, a brief encounter on a quiet street, was now transforming into something far larger, something unstoppable. War did not arrive suddenly. It advanced step by step, decision by decision, like a door slowly closing, until there was no way back. The assassination had already faded into the background. Now it was about power. Austria-Hungary made the first move. On July 28, 1914, it declared war on Serbia. A single declaration, but it did not stay contained, because behind Serbia stood Russia. Within days, Russia began mobilizing its army, not as an attack, but as a warning, a signal that Serbia would not stand alone. But in Europe's fragile system, mobilization itself was seen as war. Germany responded immediately, bound to Austria-Hungary, and driven by fear of being surrounded by enemies. It declared war on Russia. Then, almost automatically, France became the next target. Alliances were no longer choices. They were obligations. What followed was not chaos. It was precision. Germany activated the Schlieffen Plan, a strategy designed years before, built on speed and aggression. The plan demanded a rapid strike through Belgium to defeat France before Russia could fully mobilize. There was no time for hesitation, no space for diplomacy, only execution. German forces crossed into Belgium, a neutral country. That single decision changed everything, because neutrality had been broken, and Britain could no longer remain outside the conflict. Within days, Britain declared war on Germany, and just like that, a regional conflict had become a continental war. Armies began to move, millions of soldiers mobilizing across borders. Trains carried men toward front lines they did not yet understand. Governments spoke of honor and duty, while beneath it all, the scale of what had begun remained unseen. Each leader believed they were acting rationally. Each decision followed logic within its own system. But those systems were never designed to stop. They were designed to react, to escalate. And now, they were doing exactly that. The truth became impossible to ignore. This was no longer about Sarajevo, not about Gavrilo Princip, not about 2 gunshots on a summer morning. Those moments had only revealed what was already in place. A world prepared for war, and unable to prevent it. By early August 1914, Europe was no longer on the edge of conflict. It had fallen into it. This moment still raises questions that history continues to debate. What should have been done differently, and who truly holds responsibility? Those thoughts carry weight, and they deserve to be heard. When the guns finally fell silent, the world that had existed before 1914 was gone, not damaged, not changed, but erased. Empires that had stood for centuries collapsed under the weight of the war they helped create. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, fractured into smaller nations. The Ottoman Empire, dismantled and divided. The German Empire, defeated and humiliated. The Russian Empire, consumed by revolution. What remained was not peace, but a rearranged world filled with new borders, new tensions, and unfinished conflicts. Millions had died. Millions more returned changed forever. And yet, the question persisted. How did it all begin? History often pointed to a single figure, Gavrilo Princip, a young man, standing on a street, pulling a trigger. But over time, that explanation began to feel too simple, because the deeper truth revealed something far more unsettling. Princip did not create the war. He exposed it. The alliances had already been formed. The armies had already been built. The plans had already been written. Leaders had prepared for a conflict long before Sarajevo. What Princip's action did was remove the final barrier, the last excuse for hesitation. His legacy, however, did not settle easily into history. In some places, he was remembered as a hero, a symbol of resistance against imperial rule. In others, he was seen as a terrorist, a man whose actions unleashed unimaginable suffering. Both interpretations existed because both contained fragments of truth, but neither told the full story. Because history is rarely shaped by individuals alone. It is shaped by systems, by pressure, by fear, by decisions made in moments where options feel limited, but consequences are limitless. And perhaps that is the most dangerous lesson of all, that the world does not always collapse through grand design. Sometimes it collapses because it was already too fragile to survive one small moment. The gunshots in Sarajevo did not start World War I. They simply revealed that it had already begun. If this story brought clarity to a moment often misunderstood, a subscription helps preserve these deeper truths for future generations. Sharing it with someone who values real history keeps the conversation alive. And on this channel, the next story is already waiting. Another chapter where history reveals what it tried to hide.